and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you.
Hello, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Helen. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm very well. Very excited to be doing another podcast episode.
Excellent. And we're talking about the solution-focused approach to coaching today, aren't we?
We are definitely doing that, yes.
Okay, let's get started. So, Tom, let's start with what is the solution-focused approach to coaching?
The solution-focused approach to coaching is an outcome-orientated, a future-focused approach that is probably as far away from the person-centered approach that we've discussed before on this podcast as you can get without being directive. So it's much faster moving. It's much more about coming up with a solution, as the name would suggest, whereas the person-centered approach is much more about taking your time, allowing the person to tell their story, staying with their situation. So we move much faster in solution-focused approach.
Excellent. And if anyone wants to explore the person-centered, that was episode 2, by the way.
Lovely. So the solution-focused approach has its roots in solution-focused brief therapy, which was a type of therapy that was devised in Milwaukee in the 1970s. So it's been around a while. And like a lot of other therapeutic approaches that have found its way into coaching, it gives us some useful tools and techniques. So we're not doing therapy in the coaching room. We've discussed this before, but there are some useful tools and techniques that we can borrow and use in a coaching approach. So rather than addressing problems and sticking with the problem, really exploring and analysing the problem, the emphasis in solution-focused coaching is to look at the solution, to find the solution, build on the strengths of the person in front of us, and really explore perhaps what's going well, what strengths they have, what resources they have that will take them to the outcome that they want to see.
Excellent. That's really interesting because I think a lot of people wouldn't have anticipated that it had come from therapy.
Yeah, no, and I think most people would have thought that it comes from a business approach. So going back to John Whitmore's book, Coaching for Performance, he was very much a business coach, and he'd taken a lot of his tools and techniques, his approach from sport. So, and obviously solution-focused approach lends itself well to business. You know, in business, we want that goal. We want to know how we're going to get there, when we're going to get there. It's all very results driven. So solution focused has that thrust to it that we are looking for a solution. We're looking to move on and to reach our desired outcome. It might not necessarily be a goal as it might be in the business world, but we would still have a desired outcome. And I think this is something that's really appealing to doctors because, and in fact, I've just been talking to a doctor this morning who's going to be coming onto our course in the next few weeks. And he was saying that he'd been told he's going to struggle with coaching because he's very solution focused. He's very good at coming up with solutions for other people. And of course, that is the case with doctors. They are educated and trained to come up with a solution. So they will explore the situation. They'll take a history, they will look for the symptoms, they will then diagnose, and then they will prescribe a treatment or a change in behaviour that they think is the right course of action.
Which is what we want when we go to a GP, right?
Absolutely, yeah. They're the experts.
Thank you,
So
yes.
yeah. So we want that from a doctor, but from a coach, that's not the relationship that we have with a coach. And we're quite clear in our coaching, and I think most coaches are the same, that we are not there to give advice. We are there perhaps to share some information, but to actually draw the answer out of the person in front of us. So I think there's often a misconception around solution focus that it's the coach that's coming up with the solution, where actually it's still the coachee that's coming up with their own answers. We're just perhaps moving a little bit faster than we would in a person-centered approach to ensure that they do come up with their own answers. So I think a good way to think about this is if you are coming up with your own solutions as a coach, you're actually mentoring, you're not coaching. And that's fine if you're being engaged as a mentor. But if you're actually being engaged as a coach, if that's your job in the coaching room, to be a coach, then your role is to draw the solutions from the person in front of you. And I think it is that is the distinction between coaching and mentoring. And it's a distinction that's often blurred in the coaching room, that a lot of coaches get drawn into giving answers. They want to make it easy for the coachee. They want to help them out. They want to rescue them a little bit. And they might well be asked by the coachee, well, what do you think? And that draws them into giving an answer. But that's not what we want to do as a coach. We want to stay with the coachee answering the question for themselves.
Okay, so what would you say are the defining elements of the solution-focused approach?
Well, some of the defining elements are what we said at the beginning. It's outcome orientated. We are looking for what the coachee desires as an outcome. We're encouraging them to have a vision of success around what they want to achieve. So that's very much part and parcel of it. We're not spending too much time talking about the problem. We're talking about where they want to get to, which allows me to ask my favourite coaching question.
What would you like to have happen?
That's it. Yeah. So we just draw them away from the problem and start focusing on the future. That's not always the case when you ask that question. Sometimes the coachee will stick with the problem and they'll continue to talk about the problem. But that's the intention, is to move them on. So it's future focused. It emphasises looking towards the future and moving towards that desired outcome. We're going to focus on the coachee's strengths and their resources. So we'll perhaps talk about the past in the sense of, tell me about a time when this has worked really well, or tell me about a time where you've been supremely confident. What was going on for you then? What strengths did you utilize in that moment? What resources did you call upon to make that happen? So there are questions that we can ask about the past that are still going to draw the coachee forward and look at things in a much more positive way. So that's something else that we will do. We will perhaps use scaling and some way of measuring their progress. So we've talked in a previous episode about the wheel of life and having that, okay, where are you now and where do you want to be? And looking at the gap. So we'll perhaps use scaling on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you? Obviously, we want some parameters around that. So if it's about starting a project, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 is I haven't even started yet and 10 is I finished, where are you on that project? They might say, well, I'm a 4. Now that gives us a really good opportunity to think, okay, so you're already a 4. We're not starting from 1. There's already been some progress. How have you gone about making that progress? Which then allows them to talk in an empowered way about what's working for them. They have some self-efficacy because they've already made progress on their 1 to 10 scale. It's going in the right direction. So that's another part of the solution-focused approach. Once we've got that idea of making progress, is looking at small steps. So we're not perhaps going to take them from 4 to 10 straight away, because that's a huge leap in some cases. But we might say, okay, so you're a 4 at the moment. That's great that you're already a 4. What could you do to move you to a 5? So we're just looking to take that small step. And then if you're a 5, what would that look like? So just small steps is very much part of the solution-focused approach. And making progress along the way. And then celebrating success. So for the coach to acknowledge that some progress has been made and to recognise that and talk to the coachee about that. I've had a couple of instances recently myself where I've had that opportunity to just sit back and say, do you know, you've made some really good progress. In the 6 months that we've been working together, you've come a long way. And this is what I've noticed. So we're not giving feedback in the way that your boss might give feedback, but we're just noticing what we notice and sharing that with our coachee. And again, I think that's quite empowering for them to know that they've made some progress.
So what else is there about this particular approach?
With solution-focused coaching, along with the other coaching approaches, it is all about drawing the answer out of the person in front of us. So we're staying with that approach. It's not us giving the answers, it's them coming up with their own answers. Asking questions. So it's not for us to have the right answers, it's for us to have the right questions to draw the answers out of them. We're not going to overanalyze the situation, so we're not going to create paralysis by analysis. We want to move the client forward, so we're going to be looking at what that future vision is. And that's a really useful tool that comes from the solution-focused therapy, is imagining that future and using a magic wand question to allow the coachee to imagine the future. And I had a very practical experience of this working with a coachee during lockdown. Everyone had gone online. His team meetings had gone online. And he came to the session and he said, I need to sort out my team meetings. They're really dysfunctional. And I said, "Oh, tell me about that." And he told me what happened in his meetings, and that they would start off with a Monday morning management meeting where someone would make a 5-minute presentation of something. Other people would listen. They would come in at the end, ask questions. Then they would have a wider agenda. But he said it doesn't happen. They just start interrupting and talking over, and the 5-minute presentation becomes a 20-minute presentation because people keep interrupting, and then people start arguing, and it all just becomes a bit of a free-for-all. So I asked him the question, let's imagine that on Sunday night you go to bed, and whilst you're asleep, a magic wand is waved. Now, you don't know the magic wand has been waved because you're asleep. But when you wake up on Monday morning, you go online and you enter that meeting. Because the magic wand has been waved, everything is exactly how you want it to be. How would you know that the magic wand had been waved? And he said, well, so to start with, the 5-minute presentation would be a 5-minute presentation. Everyone else would be on mute, so they wouldn't be interrupting. And that would remain the case until they'd finished. Then they would ask any questions they've got, and then we would have a more general conversation. And I would call upon people to speak. They would be on mute until I asked them. And that's the way it worked. And it would all run to time, and we'd finish on time, and it would all be lovely. And so that was his vision. So I asked him who facilitated those meetings, who chaired them, and he said, I do. I said,
Okay.
so, what steps could you take to ensure that happens? So he had a vision, he knew what he needed to do, and he went off and did it. So that was a very practical, sometimes when we talk about the magic wand question, it's sometimes called the miracle question, and people can start getting a bit hung up on the fact that it's crazy thinking, but it can be very practical just to have a vision of how you want it to be. And I was watching a very bad movie on a plane flight recently where there was just one statement in it that stuck with me. The rest of the movie was rubbish, but the statement was, or the question that was asked was, if you don't know what you want, how do you ask for it? And I think if we can create that vision through the magic wand question so that someone has that idea of what ultimate success would really look like, then they can start to put things in place. They can ask for it. So we did some GP training a little while ago down in Bristol. And one of the questions that I asked to them is, if you turned up on Monday morning and a magic wand had been waved on Sunday evening, so if you turned up into your practice on Monday morning and everything is as you wanted it to be, how would you know the magic wand had been waved? Now, in asking that question, GPs going into the practice aren't necessarily going to have that. It might not be possible to have everything they want, but if they know what they want, then they can start to implement some of the things that are going to help to make things better. So it can have very practical applications. Say it is solution focused. So we are looking for a solution that will work.
It sounds to me like the GROW model, which most coaches will be very familiar with as a starting point to coaching, is very fitting with the solution focused approach. Absolutely,
yeah. They didn't come from the same source. Say the GROW model was very much John Whitmore's model, and he wasn't a solution-focused approach, but that kind of stems from business and looking at goals and how you go about achieving them. And I think the solution-focused runs in parallel to that. I think it is very much about drawing the potential out of the person in front of you, giving them some self-efficacy that they can achieve what they want to achieve and that they have internal strengths and resources that they can call upon, and they will find their own way forward. And then once they have that idea of what steps they're going to take to move them forward, then over time, if you're working with a client over time, you can go back to that, see what progress is being made, see what barriers are getting in the way. And because obviously we know that there are going to be some emotional and psychological barriers that come up for people that will pause things and will prevent them, will make them procrastinate. So we have to be ready for that. Just because we've used a solution-focused approach doesn't mean that it will all be plain sailing and that they're not going to have some barriers. But we'll come to those when we come to them, and we'll address them then, and we will find a way forward from there.
Excellent. So how do you know when a solution-focused approach is the one to use?
Well, some people will use a solution-focused approach always. So that is their approach to coaching. I'm a solution-focused approach, so they will always come with that. For me, I am much more person-centered. I'm an integrative coach, so I will use different approaches, but I will tend to start off with a person-centered approach. So I really want to understand the person in front of me. So we'll explore their values, their strengths, we'll explore the situation, what's going on for them. And we'll take some time over that. We're not in any rush. So that might take a whole session just to explore what's going on for them. But at some point we want to move forward. And if using that person-centered approach isn't moving things forward, then we might introduce a solution-focused approach that is going to help move them on their way.
Now, one of the things that I love about the solution-focused approach is the recognition and the idea that you should check in with clients about what changes have happened already, even between an initial interaction, maybe a discovery or call or chemistry session, and their first coaching session, because things can shift in that time, even just having that initial talk about engaging you as a coach. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, well, you and I both do. I tend to call mine a chemistry session. You call yours a discovery call. But we are looking in that time to find out what the coachee wants from their coaching. What's their best hope for the coaching? And that gives us some really rich material to work with in terms of the solution-focused approach, because we're looking for that outcome that they want by the time they've finished working with us. But in doing that, they start to then think about the coaching. And if there's a week's gap between the chemistry call and the first session, or 2 weeks, then we have that opportunity when they come to the first session to say, what new thinking have you done since we met last? Or you might say, what's changed for you since we had that conversation? And I had a lady recently who we had the chemistry session, and we had the first session a week later. And I said, what's changed for you since we had that conversation? And she said, I'm not feeling guilty anymore. Now, we hadn't actually done any coaching at that point, but that was her response. I'm not feeling guilty anymore.
That's fantastic. There's something, isn't there, about people making that first step to work with someone in a coaching capacity that seems to trigger the shift to happen. It feeds into that idea that the coaching isn't all about what happens in the coaching room, that so much more happens between sessions. And I love the magic of that, really.
Yeah, I think as coaches, we like to think that all the work is being done by us in the coaching room, and that's what's really having the impact. But of course, it's the coachee that is doing the thinking. So that thinking will carry on from the chemistry session. They'll do that thinking into the first session. They'll carry on thinking during the session, but they'll carry on thinking beyond it. So 95% of the work goes on outside the room. So we're not doing much at all. It's their thinking, and their thinking might well change over that time. So when they come back for their second session, their thinking might change completely. So they might have agreed with us they were going to go off and do something as a result of the coaching, and having done some more thinking, they've changed their mind and they're doing something completely different. And that's fine. It's their world. It's their life. They have to work that out for themselves, and we are there to support them. But it's not our solution. It's for them to decide to find their own solutions.
And I think that happens with all approaches to coaching. It's recognised as a thing that happens within the solution-focused approach, which I quite like.
Yeah, I don't think all coaching approaches take that. We're going to talk at some point in the future about Gestalt coaching, which is very different. It's very much about paradoxical change, about change emerging without necessarily aiming for it and having a next step. We're just going to be allowing it to emerge. But that's a different approach for another day. But for now, I think the solution-focused approach offers a really helpful way of interacting with coachees, and one that you might choose to engage with if you don't already. I think probably people do use some of it already, even if they don't call it solution-focused.
That's great. Thanks so much, Tom, for introducing us to the different elements of the solution-focused approach. And like you say, I think that it can be used really well in combination with other approaches. We don't have to solely focus on one way of working with clients. So we can be flexible and really work with their needs and how they show up in the coaching room. And this is just one way, and we'll be continuing to explore other ways as we go forward.
And there is lots more out there to explore. So we'll be doing this probably once every 6 episodes. We'll take a different approach and explore that. So keep your eyes open for a podcast episode that will be looking at another approach to coaching fairly soon. Next time on our podcast, we will be continuing with our series of interviews with coaches, and I will have the delight, the pleasure of interviewing Helen for that episode. So we're very much looking forward to that. Hope you are too. If you haven't subscribed yet to the podcast, please do. If you'd like to leave us a review, we'd be very, very grateful for that too. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.